Good evening and welcome to the Town of Cary Planning and Zoning Board meeting. Thank you for joining us tonight. I now call this meeting to order. Our Board Clerk, Julie Mitchell, will take roll for this evening.
Thank you, Chair. For the record, Boshana Etten is absent this evening and Andy Coe. The following board members are present: Sal Camarada, Chris Johnson, Mike Roselli, Stephen Crutchfield, Sean McAndrew, Jeff Moncrief, and Ken George. Thank you.
Thank you. The Cary Community Plan will continue to be the guiding document for this board. This board is to function as citizen advisors to the Town Council, who will make the final decision on all rezoning activity. Our citizen opinions, based on the Cary Community Plan document, play a very important role in advising our town leaders. While this is a public meeting, it is not a public hearing. There is no opportunity for the public to speak during this meeting. However, if you do have comments about any of these items, we encourage you to reach out to the staff by email or phone. You may reach out to our board members through email. You may also contact the council members directly through email or during the public speaks out portion of any regularly scheduled town council meetings. These meetings may be streamed on the Town of Cary website and will be posted to YouTube. All past planning and zoning board meetings are available to view on YouTube. The first action for tonight is going to be the adoption of the agenda. There's been one change to the posted agenda in that we will have a presentation from Cary's finance team at the end of the after we've presented our first case. So would someone make a motion to amend the agenda and to approve what we already had posted on the current agenda?
I motion to amend and then approve the agenda for this evening.
Second.
Thank you. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Next item is approval of the May 24th meeting minutes. All of this has been posted online. Had a chance to read them. Unless there are any proposed changes to those minutes, would someone make a proposal to accept the meeting?
I move we accept the minutes for the May 20th meeting.
Second.
Thank you. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Thank you. We only have one case tonight, and that's 21 RAZ 16 Old Apex Road rezoning. Aaron Puckett will share the staff's presentation. Following the presentation, the applicant will have an opportunity to address the board, and we will ask questions of the staff and the applicant. Before you get started, I do want to say just a couple of words about this case because it's a little bit different than maybe what the board is used to seeing. For those of you that were here or maybe have done some research, this case basically came before the board in November 2022. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. And at that time, it was found to be inconsistent with the community plan. Since that time, many changes have been made to what we saw in November of 2022. The town council they have very different options they can use to bring a case before us or themselves. And while there was no additional community meetings, and there was not an additional public hearing, the town council, by consent, added this item back to us. So what we're seeing tonight is very different from November 2022. And so for those of us that were here then, we kind of need to put that aside and then look at what we're seeing tonight. Matt, and did I say that correctly? Any other comments?
No, you said that perfectly. Essentially, just forget that happened and review this as if it was coming to you before the first time, because this is what you're looking at tonight. You are determining whether this case is consistent or not consistent with the plan. And things happened in the past, and it's good to know that history and context, but what you're looking at tonight is whether or not this case before you is consistent or not consistent.
Perfect, thank you. And I just wanted to get that out. I know this is a little bit different, but like I said, the town council has many different options available to them to bring something, and they used this one, and that's how we find ourselves tonight.
Can I ask a quick question? though?
Yes.
Did I hear you say that this has not gone back for a public hearing?
No, it did not have one prior to us.
Okay.
Normally, there's a neighborhood meeting, the town council has a public hearing, it comes to us, it goes back to them. Those other two steps
But the neighborhood meetings, there has been a neighborhood meeting for the new
in
one?
2022.
Okay, all right.
No new neighborhood meeting, no new meeting before the town council.
Correct. All right.
Thank you.
Thank you. And good evening, Board. This is a request to rezone approximately 21 acres located on Old Apex Road, about 550 feet south of its intersection with West Chatham Street. This site may look familiar to some of you. As the chair just said, the Planning and Zoning Board did review this case back in November 2022. Chair, you stole my thunder a little bit. I was going to just quickly go over the process and meetings to date.
You can still do it.
That's his
We
job.
we need a lot of reinforcement, so don't leave anything out.
All right, well, I'll go through this fairly quickly. You've already set this up very well, but just for a refresher of the steps to date. So, as we typically do, staff hosted a neighborhood meeting for this back in January of 2022. We do also understand that the applicant held several additional meetings with interested citizens after that initial required neighborhood meeting. A public hearing was then held for this item at Council's July 2022 meeting, and they referred the case to this board. As the chair noted, it was considered in November of 2022, and at that time found inconsistent. At their December 2023 meeting, council referred the case back to the Planning and Zoning Board for additional consideration at the applicant's request. That is somewhat uncommon, but as you noted, it is one of the options for council action per LDO section 341D. For each of these public meetings, staff also sent a courtesy email to any citizens who have signed up to follow this case online. The subject property is an assemblage of 4 parcels with frontage on Old Apex Road. The CSX Railroad is also located about 200 feet to the east, and the Triangle Forest subdivision is adjacent to the west. Portions of the Oxford Hunt PDD are located to the north, and Garden Supply Company is located to the south across Old Apex Road. A portion of the Oxford Hunt PDD to the north of the subject rezoning is already zoned for a variety of residential options, including multifamily. And the applicant intends to utilize this parcel, outlined in red, for a portion of the development, in part because access on a second public street will be required for the number of units proposed. This parcel is not included in the rezoning request, since it does have existing zoning entitlement for the proposed use. According to Cary's GIS, there are stream buffers that impact portions of the site. Field determination of such features is required at time of development plan review. The largest portion of the buffer that you see on this slide is associated with a pond on the site, which the applicant plans to drain in order to develop the site. Old Apex Road is identified as a 5-lane thoroughfare on the future roadway widths map. Currently, it varies from 2 to 3 lanes along this site's frontage. The Go Cary Apex Cary Express route runs along Old Apex Road, but does not have a stop in the vicinity of the subject property. However, Go Cary has a planned future Route 12, which will travel along Old Apex Road with a potential stop in the vicinity of this property. Go Cary staff will work with the developer during development plan review to identify potential transit access locations. For the Parks, Recreation, and Cultural Resources Master Plan, there is a planned greenway trail along the western boundary of the subject site. The current zoning of the assemblage is R40, residential 40, and the applicant family conditional use, or RMFCU. The applicant has offered several zoning conditions, including limiting the use of the site to 223 multifamily dwellings and associated accessory uses. This is a reduction from the last time this case was in front of this board, when 255 units were initially proposed. At least 11 of those units will be rented to those at 80% or less of area median income, or AMI. for a period of 20 years. And additional conditions include limiting all buildings on the site to a maximum of 22 units each, providing a 15% increase to the amount of open space required by the LDO, which could also include community gathering space, which will be a minimum of 6,250 square feet, 25% more than the LDO requirement, and 2,000 square feet of additional landscaped area in the vicinity of the greenway easement, which will be planted with trees and shrubs. The applicant has also committed to providing at least 10 electric vehicle charging stations, wiring at least 50% of garages for future EV charging capabilities, installing solar conduit in at least 50% of the buildings. And they have also provided a concept plan, which is also new tonight, to demonstrate how the site might transition from the western property line. Associated conditions include a maximum of 30 units in Pod 1, which is the area shown in the light blue on the concept plan, a 50-foot Type A buffer along the western boundary, which is 10 feet wider than the LDO requirement, plus an additional 70-foot buffer planted to a Type B standard. Retaining walls would also be permitted in this buffer as needed for the trail or other reasons. All buildings in Pod 1 shall be limited to 2 stories or 40 feet in height. As a reminder, height in the RMF zoning district is limited to 35 feet, but with the option to add an additional foot of height for every additional foot that setbacks are exceeded. This condition would cap that additional height bonus, essentially, at an additional 5 feet. And all units in this pod would also have an attached garage. Please note this exhibit does not specifically show items that are already LDO requirements, such as streetscapes and greenway trails. Additional conditions include constructing the greenway, shown on this site in the Parks, Recreation, and Cultural Resources Master Plan, along with a pedestrian crossing across Old Apex Road and a rectangular rapid flashing beacon, or RRFB, as long as it is warranted and approved by NCDOT. They've also provided a number of architectural requirements, including 50% masonry for street-facing building facades. That's an increase to the 35% required by the Community Appearance Manual. Ensuring street-facing garages do not project more than a foot beyond front facades, providing pitched roofs and breaking up roof lines horizontally or vertically, providing at least one window on the side facade of end units, and providing attached garages for at least half of all units. And also providing an art installation on the site which will be visible from Old Apex Road. The applicant has also offered some of the traffic improvements recommended by the traffic study, including extending the northbound and eastbound left turn lanes at the Old Apex and Cary Parkway intersection to the southwest of the site, as well as improvements at each of the site access points. The applicant's traffic engineer submitted justification for the improvements not offered, which was attached to your staff report as a separate memo. Note that Site Drive 3, which is shown in the northernmost circle on this slide, is outside of the area proposed for the rezoning, and that is because, as previously mentioned, the development would need to include the parcel to the north to meet Cary requirements for access to a second public street. This access point was also an assumption of that traffic study. An analysis of the request against the Cary Community Plan finds the policies from a number of chapters apply. Regarding LIVE, the proposed use of multifamily residential would provide more housing choice on one of the few remaining R40 zoned assemblages in this area. Of existing housing in a 1-mile radius of the site, only about 14% of units are multifamily. The LIVE chapter can also support residential infill when those uses are designed to be context sensitive, which can be addressed by housing type, building massing, setbacks, density, buffers, and other strategies. While the density is significantly higher than that of the Triangle Forest neighborhood to the west, conditions to provide an increased buffer, along with architectural and massing requirements, may help meet this policy. The provision of apartments supports the work policy to provide diverse housing options to support Cary's current and future workforce. The commitment to construct the Greenway segment along the western property line of the site exceeds the LDO requirement to only dedicate an easement for Cary to construct the trail in the future, thereby helping meet goals of the engaged chapter. Similarly, the construction of the greenway and an RRFB pedestrian signal help address the MOVE policy regarding safety for all modes. The SHAPE chapter speaks to providing transitions between land uses by separating them, such as with increased buffers, or connecting them using form or use transitions. The proposed height and density alone could potentially make this transition from Triangle Forest to the west challenging, but the previously mentioned massing and architectural conditions, as well as the additional buffers, will help with this transition. As noted, the applicant has offered a wider perimeter buffer along the western property line where adjacent to that lower density neighborhood. The provision of an art piece and certain architectural considerations, including the provision of garages, which could help limit surface parking, speak to the aesthetic policy of the SHAPE chapter. The Future Growth Framework designation of Heritage Neighborhood also supports the largest diversity of housing types and supports multifamily uses in these areas. Finally, the previously mentioned buffer and increased open space, along with a commitment to at least 10 communal EV charging stations and pre-wiring for some garages, does at least partially address some of the SERV chapter policies regarding sustainable energy, open space, and tree preservation. We do note that the provision of solar conduit alone does not guarantee future solar installation, and therefore that item does not appear to materially address SERV policies. A virtual neighborhood meeting was held in January 2022, and over 80 members of the public attended. There were questions and comments on a variety of topics. A public hearing was held in July of that year. There were 46 comments, a combination of written, call-in, and in-person participation. Details of the citizen and council feedback were also included in your staff report. The applicant made a number of changes after that public hearing, including an increase in the number of communal EV charging stations from 6 to 10 and EV-ready wiring in 50% of garages, an increase of 15% to the LDO required open space, a 100-foot setback from the western property line and additional massing restrictions, some architectural considerations, and an art installation, and solar conduit in at least 50% of the buildings. At the Planning and Zoning Board's last meeting at which this item was considered, the request was found inconsistent with the plan. The applicant therefore asked council to refer the case back to the board at their December 2023 meeting in order to allow you to further evaluate the case with the changes made since your last meeting. Since that meeting in 2022, the applicant has reduced the total units from 255 to 223. This is a reduction from 12 units per acre, which is the maximum allowed in RMF zoning, to 10.5 units per acre. They provided the concept plan that you saw a few moments ago, limiting development in the westernmost pod to a maximum of 30 units and 2 stories, with garages for all units in that pod. They increased the previous commitment to a 100-foot setback from the western property line to 120 feet, and planting the additional 70 feet outside of that required Type A buffer to a Type B for some additional screening. And they've added a workforce housing condition committing to 11 units affordable to those making 80% or less of area median income for a period of 20 years. Throughout this process, staff has continued to receive consistent emails and 311 inquiries from citizens with questions and comments about the case. More details are included in your staff report, but in general, much of the feedback has been regarding the proposed density and use of the site, concerns with transitions, including the potential height of the buildings, concerns around parking and traffic impacts, as well as environmental impacts and site drainage. A number of comments also cited a preference to leave the site undeveloped. Staff's preliminary recommendation is for consistency with the plan. We found that the request provides for more housing choice in the area, which can support both live and work policies. The proposal also commits to at least 11 workforce housing units. The commitment to construct the greenway segment proposed on the site and provide an RRFB or similar pedestrian treatment addresses engage and move policies regarding the provision of greenway connections and safety for all modes of travel. While density is higher than that of the neighborhood to the west, an increased western perimeter buffer, which also provides 120 feet of separation, and additional massing limitations within the western development pod may help with the context-sensitive transitions, which are recommended by policies of both chapters. The Future Growth Framework designation of heritage neighborhoods supports a variety of housing types, including multifamily. Serve policies are also addressed with an increase to required open space and buffers, as well as the provision of some EV charging and wiring. This concludes my presentation. The applicant's representative, Jamie Schwedler, is here, and following her comments, I'm available for your questions.
Thank you.
Thank you, Aaron. Good evening, Mr. Chair and members of the board. I'm Jamie Schwedler here on behalf of the applicant. I'm with Parker Poe at 301 Fayetteville Street, and I'm joined tonight by Avi Graywall and Todd Rankine with Singh, as well as our design and consultant team and my own colleague, Walker Abbott. We appreciate the work that Aaron and staff has put into this case to not only offer suggestions, but to help us bring this case back in a way that's more consistent with the Imaginary Cary plan and responds to all of the neighbor feedback that we heard throughout this case. The applicant did conduct its own neighborhood meeting in accordance with the LDO back in 2022, and about 5 neighborhood meetings were conducted with lengthy requests from the neighbors that were responded to, not always in the way that the neighbors hoped, but we took that all into consideration from 2022 and have brought a case forward that is in line with your Imagine Cary plan. And Aaron did a great job in describing that. I'd like to just touch on the areas where we've made significant improvements and how we brought this case back and why we made those changes that we've made. So as Aaron explained, this case was submitted in 2021, was before the board in 2022, and the original request offered those 255 units, garden-style apartments with not much of a buffer along the western property line, a smaller buffer to the west, and not really a transition as you moved from east to west into the Triangle Forest neighborhood. It also had no affordable housing, and that's something that we heard the citizens and the council encourage us to look at those transitions and to look at how the density worked across the site and whether we could incorporate a very varied types of housing and offer some workforce housing along with the plan. When this board took the case up, it went through the lengthy conditions, and the conditions at that time were very complicated because they'd been meticulously responded to by the neighbors. But they were confusing because they were kind of come forward ad hoc across the 5 different meetings. There was no concept plan. And so it was difficult for the board to envision how this transition would work and how it would move from west to east across the site. So the applicant took a pause after that board meeting and it digested all of the input that it heard from those 5 neighborhood meetings, as well as the town council meeting, and the significant work that staff did to try to help be creative in the ways to be consistent with the Imagine Cary plan. We resubmitted in April of 2024, went through several rounds of review, and are now before you tonight. And the new request is a plan that delivers on all of those earlier requests in response to both the council and neighborhood requests in meaningful ways. Does it make everyone completely happy? No. Align with the Imagine Cary plan, and it does align with all of the policies that Aaron and the rest of the staff took a great deal of time to detail in your staff report. I'd like to just take a minute and highlight 4 main areas. First, we're offering 223 multifamily units to offset the growing need for housing in Cary in the area where the Imagine Cary plan instructs multifamily is appropriate. In fact, it cites that multifamily is a predominant use type in the heritage neighborhood. And that's important on this infill site, close to jobs and areas where folks need to be able to get into town quickly and might be looking for a product that's different from single family. Multifamily is sometimes inherently more affordable than a single-family home and offers a different price point and type of lifestyle that's available to different citizens. In addition to offering those 223 units, 11 of those will be affordable at 80% AMI for 20 years, consistent with Cary's current expectations. Now, that's significant for several reasons. We're adding those policies in line with the Live Chapter Policy 6, which encourages affordable dwelling units, and Policy 2, which encourages greater housing choice. The heritage neighborhood designation itself also encourages multifamily residential use as a type of diverse housing. So we're in an area that's an infill site surrounded by a lot of single-family homes that were developed in the 50s and 60s, and this is not only a new type of product, but adds a different type of price point for folks looking for something closer into town that might not be able to afford a single-family home. Second, we've reduced the density in a meaningful way. We've added a concept plan and split conditions into pods to make the transitions improved and to better explain how they work. So we reduced overall density by 32 units so that the site is going from that maximum density of 12 units per acre, which would otherwise be allowed, to 10.5 units per acre. That's for the entire site overall. But by adding the pod 1 that's shown on the screen and separating that from pod 2, we've really concentrated the restrictions on pod 1 to bring them as close to the nature and the character of the Triangle Forest immediately to the west as we can. And that includes new conditions that are grouped to clarify what that transition looks like, but also a density restriction from pod 1. And that's equivalent to 3.8 dwelling units per acre. And that's very significant because not only Triangle Forest immediately to the west, but the majority of the heritage neighborhood kind of surrounding this area is zoned R12. And that zoning allows 3.63 units per acre. So we restricted ourselves to 3.8. We're trying to mirror the density the Triangle Forest has in an effort to bring ourselves in line with that character. So overall density reduced, but also specifically in pod 1 to make that transition better. All supported by the Future Growth Framework map and policies on transitions between uses. Third, we've also increased the buffer between this project and the Triangle Forest neighborhood to the west. Aaron did a great job of explaining that. Not only have we increased the setback, so the first structure or building you'd have is now 120 feet from the property line as opposed to 100, but the 50-foot first buffer you hit is going to be a planted buffer, the highest standard that you have in Cary. The next 70 feet is going to be a type B. And within both of those, you're not going to have structures except for the necessary retaining walls or things that we need to put in type B because we're also committing to build you a greenway there. So we might have to do some site improvement in that area to install the trail, to install the greenway, the grading that's necessary. But otherwise, you won't have homes within 120 feet of that area. And this responds not only to citizen input, which really strongly wanted those homes to be as far away from the property line as possible, but also a buffer. They did not want to be able to see the homes from their area, and it responds to that SHAPE policy SHAPE chapter, policy 6, which focuses on those appropriate transitions. Now, we know a little bit more about what the SHAPE chapter says about transitions because the LIVE chapter on page 28 actually describes key design principles for those transitions, which include architectural design, building massing, heights, land uses, and buffers, all as options that an applicant could choose. They don't have to choose all of them. They don't have to choose specific ones. But this case provides meaningful conditions that addresses each. In addition to increasing that western buffer, we have the architectural design commitment of increased masonry. We have the roof elements and the architectural details that Aaron described. We also have the building maximum of 22 units per building, and then in pod 1, that restriction on the 40-foot height maximum and maximum of 2 stories with incorporated garages. So we're talking about a product that really mimics something closer to a single family or a townhome type of scale and not a garden-style apartment within that pod 1. These architectural and massing conditions also respond to the SHAPE chapter policy 8, which focuses on preserving Cary's attractive appearance and high standards of aesthetics. And all of those are in addition to the existing conditions that were part of the case that are also in line with the Cary Community Plan and were a result of already responding to citizen input as well as council input in November of 2022. The construction of the Greenway Trail on site, the flashing pedestrian beacon, the installation of new pedestrian and vehicular passageways throughout the site, all which bring more walkability and more engagement consistent with the Engage Goal 2 and MOVE Policy 1. The 10 EV charging stations and the 50% of garages wired with the EV equipment are all also consistent with those environmental restrictions and policies that the Cary Community Plan encourages. And the 15% of additional open space and community gathering area that exceed your LDO requirements bring this case even more in line with the SERVE chapter policies 5, 6, 7, and 9. We appreciate the planning and zoning comments in 2022, the time staff invested to make this proposal in line with what this council, what these citizens, and what this board encouraged us to do back in 2022. And we look forward to your comments and questions tonight as you focus on the question you're called to answer. Does the plan before you present something that's consistent with the Cary Community Plan, and whether this plan, with the 11 workforce housing units, its pedestrian crossings, its 120-foot buffer, its EV chargers, its commitment to building the greenway, not just providing an easement, and numerous sustainable commitments, further bring this plan in line with the Imagine Cary policy staff has noted in your staff report. Shape, live, engage, work, and serve chapters all come into play, and the staff has found them preliminary consistent. If you find that those commitments are consistent with the policies that the staff has laid out in the staff report, we respectfully request that you vote to move this case forward with a recommendation for approval tonight. Thank you.
Thank you. We're now going to conclude presentations and move to board questions. I just would like to do a clarification real quick, just to make sure I understand the lay of the land here, so to speak. The pods or the buildings that'll be backing up to the existing neighborhood, those are going to be 2 stories? Are they going to have, is the garage on the bottom? So are they really 3 stories, or are they 2 stories?
The condition limits them to 2 stories, so that would be regardless of how the garage is
So the
built.
garage doesn't kind of get excluded, it's part of the calculation?
Correct. That
Okay,
would still be
very good.
considered a story if it made up the
Okay,
entire
and then
lower.
the pods or the buildings that'll be elsewhere, what is their maximum height?
So that would be limited to the requirements of the RMF zoning district, and that is a 35-foot height limit, except that then that height can be exceeded by a foot for every additional foot of setbacks. So you may have heard me mention earlier in the presentation, in Pod 1, they've limited the maximum height to 40 feet. That might sound like it's actually exceeding the LDO, but what that's doing is saying that they can essentially exceed that 35-foot height by, there's really no cap on that, just however much you exceed the setbacks by. So Pod 2 could do the same thing, but it's not restricted to 40 feet. It could go a little higher, depending on how they
So
exceed setbacks.
theoretically, the pods closest to the road could be up to 4 stories tall.
If they exceed setbacks.
If they needed to.
Right. It's a little bit self-regulating because they would have to, for 4 stories, they'd have to exceed those setbacks.
Because they've given more in the back, the buffer's a lot larger than it was last time.
Yes.
So that gives them the ability to go to that height.
It does, to achieve the additional height, you do have to exceed all setbacks, so not just from the western property line where they do already have an increased buffer. It would also be, it would have to be an increase to the road setback or any other side setbacks. So it's not just that they can go up an extra 100 feet because they exceeded the setback. They have to exceed all setbacks.
Perfect. And could you just remind the board what a type A buffer is, just so everybody,
Yes.
you don't see that all the time?
So that is our densest planting standard, and I believe I have the exact rate in my notes. I should know it off the top of my head, but it's been a while since I've quoted it. It's 4 upper story trees and 14 understory trees per 100 linear feet. And then for a type A buffer that's over 30 feet wide, so both the streetscape and the perimeter buffer will be wider than that, you also get an additional 10 shrubs per 100 linear feet.
We don't see it as often, the type A?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, that was just, hopefully, I was kind of trying to do that for everyone. Can I start with you, sir?
Sure. So is there requirements for interior corridors and/or elevators serving these multifamily units that aren't two-story?
There are
Are-
not zoning conditions
There's no
committing to
zoning
that.
conditions for that, okay. The garages that Steve asked about, so those can be attached or detached?
For the units in Pod 1, I believe they are committed to attached garages for all units. Let me double check exactly how the condition is written for Pod 2. If you'll give me 1 second. Got very long conditions here. Yes, so they will all be attached. So all units in Pod 1 and at least half, more than half, because it has to be half for the entire site. So a minimum of 82 of the units in Pod 2 shall also have an attached garage. So they will actually be attached to the units.
And those in Pod 1, are those, is there any requirement for backloading versus front loading on those?
There's not, no.
Okay. I think that's it on questions. Thank you.
Just quick, the existing zoning, I believe it says R40, and that was a town zoning or county zoning originally?
That is Cary zoning.
Okay, that's, is that 40,000 square foot lots, roughly
Correct.
1 acre lots?
Exactly.
Okay, and so I was just curious, it seemed when I was looking at the map that that was actually a little lower than most of the surrounding areas. Was there a specific reason that that particular tract had that zoning versus some of the others that are around it, or that they all used to be that and they've all been rezoned to more dense?
I think it's more likely the latter option. So you'll hear our council sometimes refer to R40 as sort of a holding zone. It's essentially our lowest density zone. A lot of the property that has not been rezoned previously in Cary has that zoning district. So this site has just never been rezoned.
Gotcha, okay. No, that's all I had.
Aaron, are there any champion trees in this property, or will that happen at a future time?
That
And
would
I don't-
happen at development plan. For a conditional use rezoning like this, we would not have a tree survey this early in the process. But all our LDO requirements regarding champion tree replacement or preservation would apply.
Thank you.
I was just curious, I think I remember the property to the north that's already zoned sufficient, but's required to meet the conditions of the traffic study. Is that property owned by this same group, or is that still something that has to transpire?
That actually, I believe, has changed since the last time this board saw it. I believe when I last checked, it is currently owned by, yes, it is currently owned by
Okay,
this
so that's something that they,
property owner.
if this is approved, they can go ahead and execute on that. You're not waiting for something else to happen in order for that to be effective. And then I forget the exact term, but the crosswalk that's been discussed, I mean, it's been discussed as a, kind of a condition, but then there's a caveat of if it's deemed, and I guess that's during the LDO, just trying to understand the kind of the mechanics on that piece of the equation.
Yes, that's a great question. The reason that there's sort of that little caveat on it is because Old Apex Road is an NCDOT road, so we do need their additional approval. It's similar, well, I shouldn't say similar to, it essentially goes through a warrant process like a signal would for a vehicular intersection, but it's a different set of standards for pedestrians. So we do have to sort of include that out just in case NCDOT did not allow it at time of development plan. But our hope at this time is that if Cary is pushing for it, that they would agree
Gotcha.
that it's
Okay,
feasible.
I think that clarifies the two things I had in my mind.
I think it was quoted that partly because it was the density in Pod 1, 3.8 dwelling units per acre, more closely mirrors the density and character, I believe were the words used, for the 3.63 in the other area. And when we're dealing with, understand density, characters where I'm struggling with how it mirrors character, and I think it is even in the staff report that's, the heritage neighborhood, I think it was said something about in the reasons to, it was supported, I'll get to that on my local copy. Whoops, went to the budget. Too far. Okay. No, I'm not getting it. Here we go. Changes since staff finding. Okay. There's nothing that said, it says that there's a support multifamily. Heritage neighborhood designation supports multifamily. I'm not sure I read that the same way of versus the character and then the buffer and the transitions. If it said proposed transition because the larger buffer is there, and then one of the reasons given for it meeting it is it mirrors density and character. I don't know how, I'd like to understand how a character is mirrored by having apartments with garages mirrors a heritage neighborhood. Maybe.
And are you referring to the applicant's comments?
Maybe that's, yeah, it was in the applicant's comments. Maybe you can, she can clarify that for us. If, what you're referring to. I understand the density.
Sure.
But when you, how is the character mirrored in the heritage neighborhood with apartments with garages?
Yeah, it's a great question, Ken. I think the density is the most translatable portion there, and with the character probably lends itself to the other restrictions, the architectural restrictions, the height restriction, making sure it's of a high quality so that we don't end up with apartments that are kind of a lower quality than the existing stock next door. So what we've tried to do is not necessarily mirror them from an architectural style, but make sure that just as they took care to invest in their neighborhood and build high-quality single-family homes and all those years ago, we're trying to do the same on our side of the property line and make sure that they have a nice quality product to match that invested character.
Okay, so I'm sorry, I get, when high quality comes out, I still think about the Bojangles on High House on Davis Drive. That was high quality retail by that development. So, and Freddie's, and the tire store, they were all high quality retail according to the developers. So I don't know how we can determine what so in your mind, high quality is because it's got a garage and because there's external quality, I don't know how you call it, quality materials. What do you call it? External
Architectural elements.
architectural elements that and a garage equal high quality.
Well, I don't know when each of these homes were built, but the CAM as it exists today, as you know, requires that 35% masonry, which is a very high requirement for Cary, for anything that's built in Cary today, and certainly post the 1960s when the Triangle Forest neighborhood was developed. And so even that as a floor is a significant high quality that Cary has set itself apart. And then we've gone above that and committed to 50% of that masonry, the siding, to increase that, as well as the architectural commitments of having, facades that have some undulation, that don't have a flat surface to look at. So those type of exterior qualities, as well as the garages, I think the intent there was to try to make sure that the parking would be incorporated in the unit instead of having, what we frequently hear of concerns about, lights or, slamming doors in an open parking field. At least in that pod one, closest to those neighbors, they'd have that same sort of quality similar to their own garages.
Okay, all right, that's helpful. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Anything else? Good. Any other questions that have come up?
Yeah, I'll ask one. In pod one, my mind goes directly to townhouses here, but there's no requirement there's no requirement to do townhomes, and they're not restricted from doing townhomes, right? It could be, it's two-story flats, right?
So given the current zoning conditions, if this were approved, only multifamily would be allowed, but that's not to say that they couldn't do essentially a townhome-style multifamily or a condo-style multifamily that might appear more like townhomes, but that's not a condition.
Okay. Thank you for that clarification.
Going to that then, can you go to the approved and now built Evans Road and Cary Parkway, where there are 3-story apartments with first-floor garages that are called townhome-style apartments? How did that come, how is that considered multifamily?
I believe that project may be a combination of several residential types. I believe that site is also within the Silverton PDD, so that is one of our more flexible zoning districts, could potentially permit a greater mix, a greater height. So it's a little bit apples and oranges to this site.
Okay, so would obviously if you got a garage, you got to live somewhere. If the first floor is full of garages, then I'm assuming somebody has to go upstairs to live. But what's the difference? Is it the way it's deeded? Makes a difference between multifamily and townhomes, is what Sal was asking about? Is that what you're saying makes it the difference technically?
Right, so a townhouse would be a fee simple lot, and that's not what's proposed here. It's multifamily. But multifamily could, in addition to apartments, include something like condos where it's owned, but you don't own the underlying lot, or they can be sort of the type that look like townhomes from the outside, and you almost have like 2 floors. It's all one apartment, but instead of being 1 level, it's 2 levels and it's narrower. So there's a variety of options here that they could pursue.
And in the definitions, we typically think of apartments as rented. Other places and countries, you can buy an apartment. You can buy an apartment in New York City, I understand. It's not necessarily, they don't call it a condo. So this is all, it's just words. These could all be sold. They don't have to be rented.
Correct.
That's not any,
and the
there's
LDO
no
doesn't control ownership and the zoning
Sure.
conditions.
Okay, that helps. Thank you.
Are there any other questions? Okay, we'll close questioning and move to motions. Would someone like to make a motion for 21 RAZ 16 Old Apex Road? I think the words are on the screen.
I'll move that we find 21 REZ 16 consistent with the comprehensive plan and all other applicable plans for the reasons set forth in the staff report, presentation, discussion by the Planning and Zoning Board. It was similar to a case we had not long ago where, there are a number of changes that have happened. I think the process is working. I'm pleased to know that the traffic concerns, they've got the capacity to address that, at the outset. The greenway that they've provided, this is an area that not too far up, if you look toward, it's got good access to Bond Park, good access to Apex Community Park, but also, up at Maynard, you've got multifamily. So this is an area that does have various density. And I do feel like that extensive buffer addresses a lot of the neighborhood concerns. Not having a second meeting, that the process allowed for that. But I feel like it seems like that they have done a number of things to address, in particular, the single family and the transition of density. And as such, I find it consistent.
Would someone like to second that motion?
Second. I'll second.
Comments?
Yeah, I think, along Jeff's comments, I think the developer's done a lot. I think the buffer itself, as wide it is created and as dense as it's going to be, I think it's a great transition. I also think that there's really no sort of discussion on what's across the street from this. That's like, it's not going to be single family. It's probably going to stay commercial. So, I don't think there's any issues on the other side of the house. I think this development fits very well in this area.
Is there anyone that would like to say if they do not support this motion, and if so, why, before we take our vote?
I'd like to say, I think that we're comparing it, even though we're not supposed to, we're comparing it to what came back before. We're supposed to take this as, and when I see preliminary staff finding of increased open space and buffers, staff is telling us to compare it to the previous one. But legal counsel is telling us not to. And so I don't see that that's, it is certainly not increased open space and buffers over trees in a pond. And that's where I'm struggling. I think the preliminary staff finding is it's better than it was. I think it proposes to provide transitions via a larger perimeter buffer than required, but it's also larger than last time. So I'm tend to not support this. I don't think it's, I don't think the transition is as consistent as it needs to be.
Well, maybe a clarification is needed. I mean, I think the buffer is wider than the requirements of the LDO. So it's more than was there, but it's also more than is required in the LDO. If I'm wrong, please.
I think you're right.
You're right.
You're right.
You know, and the intent to actually mirror the density in that, that's a significant, you know, that they've divided it, they've given us a graphical, they've mirrored the density of the adjacent neighborhood, limited the height there, and then kind of pushed the density otherwise. Obviously, you know, if we weren't a growing community, maybe we could have 35 or 21 acres sitting in the middle of Cary that had a pond, but if it's not going to be available for public use, you know, is that the highest and best use of that property? At the end of the day, I just feel like, you know, it's a foregone conclusion that there's going to be additional density in and around this part of town, and I feel like this has really taken a strong effort, regardless of what we've seen previously, to work with what's a challenging scenario of mixed use all around it, and develop a plan that is sensitive to the needs of the surrounding community. And that's but that division of the two and the lower density adjacent to the single family is a really key component of the change, regardless if it's change, of the transition and the buffer that I think would be warranted to make this consistent with the plan.
Any other comments from anyone else? Ken, those were some good words. I'm with you. It's almost, even though I said don't do it, it's almost impossible to not think. But I guess I'm doing it maybe in a positive way because it is better. And to me, that neighborhood needs to be, they deserve this larger buffer. You know, they deserve a fence, they deserve a berm, whatever can do this. So I do appreciate that, and I appreciate the other comments that, you know, this is a very interesting area. It's got retail, it has single family, it's got multifamily, there's just so much here, and it's hard for us to deny someone to do something with their property, but we want it to be as, I guess, respectful as possible, because that's a very, very important part of the community plan of those that are already here. And this, at least, I think, is a much better attempt to do that. And maybe between us and when it gets to the town council, there could be other things, don't know. But I guess I'm going to vote for it because I feel that this is a much better deal for those that are already there. Having said that, all in favor of the motion that was put forward, please say aye. Aye. Those against, say nay.
Nay.
So that passes. What have we got here tonight?
6-1.
6-1, thank you. Okay, thank you for that. We do have new business tonight. We have our town finance director here with her team, and they're going to give us a briefing on their fiscal year 2025 budget. So it's nice to see you.
Oh, thank you, thank you. So good evening, Chair and board members. My name is Kimberly Branch. I am the Finance Director here in Cary. I have alongside me, where are my friends? This is Liam Braley. He is a budget analyst here, and we have Neil Duckin, who is an intern who's here to learn all he can learn about budget going into this new fiscal year. We are so excited about being here before you tonight, just to tell you where we are with budget for the most part. We've been talking over the months about how we can get more engagement from the citizens, and what better way to do that than to come out and visit some of the boards and commissions. So we are excited as we go through the presentation. If you have any questions, please feel free to ask them, and we will give you some answers. So with that, let's get into it. So our purpose tonight. We're going to bring a little bit of Cary 101 to you and just talk a little bit high level about what finance does in general, and most importantly, tonight, the budget process. We are going to go a little bit down memory lane about Cary's history and see how we have shaped into a maturing Cary. And we're going to talk a little bit about how budget has, how we are aligning budget with that concept. And we will look at the recommended budget for fiscal year 2025 by the numbers. And we're also going to just talk about in general what the fiscal year 2025 recommended budget will do for us going into the next year. So what do we do as finance? Most of you know from the beginning of the year, we adopt a budget. And then during the year, we execute that budget, whether that is executing contracts for construction or issuing debt to invest in our infrastructure. Those are some of the things that finance does holistically. And then at the end of the year, of course, we wrap up the end of the year with another annual financial report that will give you the detail of how we did based against the budget that we adopted at the beginning of the year. What is the budget? The budget is a policy document, a spending plan, a communications tool, and more. The budget is included two things, operation budget as well as a capital. When looking at operations, our fiscal year goes from July 1 to June 30th. It supports general operations. Two of our main revenue sources are property and sales tax. And looking on the capital side, we have a capital budget and plan. The first year of that capital plan is adopted along with the operations budget for the year. Following, we have 20 years are planning only. It includes infrastructure development and maintenance. And we also have some debt management in there as well. It is more about dollars than about dollars and cents. It is required by state statute, matches money to council goals and initiatives, sets priorities for resource allocation, defines levels of service, promotes efficiency and effectiveness, and achieves credibility through accountability. We wanted to show you a little bit about where we've been with this year's recommended budget. We started talking to council about budget on May 2nd during their Q3 meeting. On May 23rd, we had our first budget hearing. We are required by statute to have one public hearing for a fiscal year budget. Cary, of course, goes a little bit further than that. We have two. So we had our second public hearing on the June 10th, during the June 10th council meeting. On June 17th, we continued to discuss budget during a work session. And that brings us to this week where we will hopefully adopt our budget on Thursday night. Key takeaways from this presentation that we have for you this evening. We want to just talk to you a little bit about the market conditions that are resulting in increased costs for core services, as well as some of the reduced revenue growth that we are beginning to see. Over the recent years, we've been able to utilize some of our general funds fund balance, which is those reserves that we've had. That combined with some unprecedented sales tax revenue has allowed us to defer tax increases until now. And then lastly, the fiscal year 2025 recommended budget ensures Cary remains well positioned for the future, including investment in priority areas without further expansion, while maintaining services and infrastructure. So in talking about some of the factors we had to consider in this year's recommended budget, first, we have here sales tax. As I mentioned briefly in the previous slide, we had unprecedented levels of sales tax in the past few years. We were noticing like double-digit growth there. Well, we're beginning to notice those levels are flattening out a bit. Most recent receipt, just so you know, we were double digits, like I said before, now we're single-digit growth. So we had to consider that going into the next year. That, along with inflation that has increased some of, we're noticing increased costs as a result of some of the inflation. So with that, because we are noticing those trends, the program expansion we have going into this fiscal year, we're not going into a year of more expansion. We're going to be doing more maintenance. So in the previous years where we've been able to experience growth, we've done a lot of smart investments in Cary. Well, now that those trends are beginning to level out a little bit, we're going to concentrate on maintaining what we currently have. So in going to the Imagine Cary community plan, there was something that we stated in the community plan that we're beginning to see that holds true. The high quality of life enjoyed in Cary has propelled its growth up until now. However, national, regional, and local trends suggest a changing context for the town, and we're beginning to see that change now. We wanted to show you some trends. This is the sales tax trend that I discussed previously. Here you can see the historical trend of sales tax as we've increased from 2019 up to 2023. And this current fiscal year, which is 2024, we budgeted about $62.3 million. What we are seeing based on those newer trends that we discussed, you can see here we have with the green bar, we're projecting about 58.3. So we're down from what we initially thought. As a result, going into fiscal year 2025, we are budgeting more in line with what we're seeing those newer trends. Here's another illustration of some other revenue components that we're noticing. Residential permits, that used to be kind of our bread and butter during those growth years. Whereas now we're beginning to also see those trends as well declining. So when we think about all of that and think about what we've done in the past, again, with those smart investments, Cary is a maturing community. And so now I'm going to pass it on to Neil, and he is going to take us down memory lane to talk about some of those investments that have gotten us to where we are now.
Thank you, Kim. So we wanted to give you an idea of the history, where we've been and where we are. So we're looking back 26 years at a snapshot of 1998. So starting off, we had a boundary of 40 square miles. There was a population of 85,000, and you can see the demographics are much different than today, primarily white. The top employer at the time was SAS. The median household income was just about $55,000. Adjusted for inflation today, that would be about $104,000. Property values, so looking at the assessed value for the entire town, we were right about $6 billion. The median single-family home was assessed at a value of about 109, and again, adjusted for inflation, that would be about 207 today. Looking at our property taxes, there was a much higher property tax rate, 54 cents per $100 of assessed valuation, and then comparing that property value, the property value of that median value home, a property tax bill would have been about $600, about $1,100 in today's. We had 13 parks, 10 miles of greenway, about 900 acres of parks and recreation land. There were 5 total fire stations, 302 miles of town-owned and maintained streets. There were just under 30,000 utility customers, and in that utility area, the water supply area was Cary, Apex, and pockets of Morrisville. And then we look at today. So you'll see some pretty drastic things going into this year. We increased by over 21 miles, so we're now at 61 square miles. We have a population now of about 187,000, and the demographics are much different. Wide variety of ethnic and cultural diversity. Our top taxpayer is still SAS Institute, so some things don't change. Our median household income is around $125,000 as of 2022. And then looking at our property values, this is where the biggest jump is. We've got a total property value in the town of just under $52 billion. And then looking at the single family median home in Cary, it's just under $650,000. And you compare that to what a 1998 home would have been, you can see there's quite a big difference, while that was at 207. Our property taxes have decreased in the rate, so we're currently recommending a property tax of 32.5 cents for every $100 in assessed valuation. And then we've got a property tax bill for that median value home at $2,105. We've now got 39 parks, so that's more than triple the number we had before. We've got 95 miles of greenway. There's 2,690 acres of parks and recreation land, 9 total fire stations, and 510 miles of town-owned and maintained streets, and more than double the number of utility customers at almost 65,000. And that water supply area has also expanded. We're now Cary, Apex, all of Morrisville, RDU, and RTP. So looking at all those things, we've got 26 new parks, 85 new miles of greenway, just under 1,800 acres of parks and recreation land have been added. We've added 4 new fire stations. One of the existing fire stations was relocated. We've got 208 more miles of street in Cary, and we've got an additional 35,000 utility customers. So I will pass it off to Liam now to go over the reval and some of the actual budget numbers.
Thank you, Neil. He got the fun part. I get to tell you the boring part and the reval part. But so every county in North Carolina, every 8 years, has to go through the revaluation process. You've probably heard of it. It's where the tax assessor goes out and revalues every property in the county. That's an adjustment to adjust for market conditions. In Wake County, we used to do it every 8 years, and a couple revals ago, we moved down to every 4 years, so the sticker shock would be smaller. The sticker shock is still really, really big. We've had a 48.9% increase in values over the last 4 years. COVID obviously had some to do with that, and just the housing market in general, but a total valuation of $34.8 billion going up to $51.8 billion. And that's of the first day of each of these budget years. We have a tool. I made this tool for us in Cary, and so this is, if you want to look up the value of your home and see how it's changed over the last 4 revals, and then it will also calculate your property tax bill based on what the property tax at that time was. So that's over the past 20 years, how has the reval impacted my home? And so the tool is on our website right now. This is what the median home looks like from the last reval to this year reval, where the average assessed value has increased from $415,000 to $647,000, a $230,000 difference. The tax rate at the last reval was 35 cents per $100 evaluation. The next year, council decided to lower it by half a cent, and then this reval, we're recommending a further 2-cent decrease. And then the bill has increased over that time period from an average of $1,456 to $2,100. Property tax is the majority of our general fund funding. You can see the chart here that it has really flattened out besides these revals. So our last reval was that 2020 to 2021 increase. We have seen about $5 million of property tax additional revenue over the last 4 years. and then we're projecting about $40 million moving into this upcoming year. The value of 1 penny has increased by $1.6 million from 3.5 in 2023 to 5.1 in the upcoming fiscal year. And now I'm going to get into the real fun stuff, the budget. Our proposed budget is $503.5 million. That looks like about a 4% decrease, but you can see that's really driven by capital, which decreased by 29.9%. Our operating budget increased by about 9%. Capital is highly variable, so we had a couple large funding projects last year, like the Cary bus depot, that we fully fund in year one, but it takes us years to spend down that money. So in a couple years, we're looking at a wastewater plant increase. We're going to fully fund that in year one, and then it will take us years to spend, so it causes fluctuations, but our operating budget is much more stable. This is how it is split out by function, which is just good to know. Development and infrastructure includes planning and zoning. The utilities is also the largest discrete function of our government. It is fully funded by fees and rates. This is how it's split up by operation. So personnel is the largest category of that, but it's actually pretty small based on what we've seen in our surrounding jurisdictions. We have a pretty lean staff. And then by the numbers, the proposed tax rate, as I said, is 32.5. We have a $1 increase in our fee from $22 to $23 per month. That covers 92% of the cost of our solid waste, and a 3% utility rate increase, which is what we do each year to keep up with inflation. This budget does a lot. It accommodates the shift that Kim was talking about from a high-growth suburb to a maturing community. It continues to move forward on priority areas like housing and the environment without expanding, and it keeps Cary safe and maintains service and infrastructure at current levels. We obviously are hoping that the budget gets approved on Thursday, so you can come out and speak at Public Speaks Out. And we also have a continuous budget process, so anytime throughout the year you can reach out on social media, call 311, or come to a board meeting, and we will hear your comment, and we'll take it into consideration. But thank you.
Thank you.
That concludes our presentation. Any questions for?
No, thank you. That's very informative. I do not envy you. I think this board is a great barometer because I can't even remember, maybe it was the Fenton, I'm not sure. We don't see any retail or office coming through this board. I don't even remember, like I said, and we mainly are now seeing multifamily housing, and you're just not going to get revenue generated for the town that way. So, I keep thinking we'll see some office or retail, but the trend is certainly not there.
I'm curious what the unprecedented sales tax increase, if we have any idea what drove that in previous years.
Yeah, if I knew I would make a lot of money about the economy, but I think it was largely like stimulus checks really spurred the economy. There was also a 2019 court ruling that previously internet sales weren't being fully collected by the state, and so we were allowed to collect internet sales, and that happened just prior to the pandemic. So I think it might have been like the Amazons of the world started paying a sales tax just as they were really booming from stimulus checks.
Anything else?
Yeah, I know it's published out there, I don't want to be inaccurate, but the 32.5 cent is where we are. What was the revenue neutral rate that came back at the findings? What was that, how many cents per hundred was the revenue neutral rate?
24.4. So that's a difference of 8 cents that we've included in our budget.
Right, so so the 24.4 would be revenue neutral, and we're getting 40%? Is that like 8 cents on 24s? 8 into 24, so almost 33 cents, 33%. 33% more than revenue neutral just to hold. How much of that is accounted by that $5 million loss of what we projected for? Because we projected $5 million of growth this past year on the sales tax. I saw that from we were projecting 60-something, 63, and we got 58, so we were 5 million. So that's a penny, in effect. And then there's 7 other cents. That's what I'm trying to get my head wrapped around. Sorry, I'm trying to.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. We've been deferring a tax rate increase for a couple of years now. And so part of it is that we were using fund balance because it was too high. And so part of this is building fund balance up a little bit. It's 1 cent for that sales tax. And then it's also, we've made investments like the 2019 Shape and Cary Tomorrow's bond. And so paying off the debt that we've issued so far for that. Do you have which one? The 8 cents breakdown?
We, 4 cents is operations, 2 cents is debt service, and we have included about 2 cents for like parking decks, capital things that we've already invested in.
Okay. Can you explain the philosophy between gradually raising the utility rates even when we were spending less, so that we wouldn't have a big step? And it's a rate smoothing, I think is what it was called, for utilities. The philosophy in being utility rate spending slightly, but property tax being a big jump, and the difference in why that's a philosophy. Does that come from the finance department as far as proposals? I think we had several proposals for the rate. It would go up a penny or 2 pennies here and there, and we asked for an increase, even though our expenses were down on the water treatment plant. We had rate smoothing, but you chose not to do that in the regular budget.
Yeah, I think we're moving in a direction where we are going to have property tax rate smoothing. I've only been working here for a little over a year now, but if I could do it all over again, I think we would want to rate smooth on the property tax. The truth of it is also just it's politically a lot harder to raise property taxes than it might be to raise utility rates, and so staff might be more hesitant to recommend raising property taxes when we have money in the bank.
And the overage then that was used for the rate smoothing, in effect, to make up the difference. How much have we dipped into that? Was it the orange money, the green money? I know I forgot all the colors. Orange is the Voya. That's something different. The green money, I guess, what's that extra? We've dipped into it how much the last several years? Reduced the fund balance?
Our fund balance is down right at our policy of 33.33%. Over the past 2 years, we've spent about $20 million in fund balance.
Okay. All right. Well, that explains. I was trying to figure out how we came there. Okay. Thank you.
And any changes in our credit rating year over year?
AAA?
We're still AAA?
With all the
Excellent.
agencies.
Great job.
Thank you.
Yeah, I've got a question. I was on the Parks and Recreation Board at one time, and one of the big numbers for us was recovery, right? The expenses that were recovered by the revenues that came in. Is that tracked by the entire town for all services? And if so, do you know what that is? Just curious.
There's
Coverage.
less of a focus on townwide coverage than there might have been in the past. We really focus on it for utilities and solid waste. And it's trackable for parks, but we don't have that number.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you so much for sharing with us tonight. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good luck on Thursday.
Thank you.
There are no further items on the agenda, and with that, we will conclude our meeting. Thanks for coming tonight.